This here is the F6 Plus, and apart from making your camera look really cool, it can also help you bypass some of the limitations DSLR and mirrorless cameras have when it comes to more advanced and professional video work. Monitors like this often have tools that you see in more expensive cinema cameras, and one of the tools that I use a lot on my F6 Plus is the false colors. The false colors is kind of a exposure template that's going to show you the exposure values across your frame using this colorful overlay. And each and every one of these colors represents a luminance value or a tiny luminance range. As an example, skin tones should normally be exposed somewhere between 40 and 70 IRE, depending on your complexion. So if we turn on the false colors on this image, you will see that my face is hopefully in the area between 40 and 70. Even if I have this rather moody lighting going on here, my face is still pretty well exposed. So this feature will make exposure matching and shot matching eventually in post a lot easier and more consistent. There's also a bunch of things that may seem trivial, like crop mats and guide tools, but I've actually been using quite a lot of these lately when I've been doing shoots specifically for social media platforms, which always have these kind of quirky aspect ratios. Another life-saving feature, apart from the focus peaking or the focus assist tool on this monitor, is the headphone jack, because not all DSLR and mirrorless cameras have a dedicated headphone jack. On my Fujifilm X-T4, for example, the USB-C port kind of doubles as a headphone jack. And this becomes a problem if I'm doing things like long interviews where I need to be monitoring the audio, but at the same time I want to feed external power to the camera so I don't have to worry about batteries and all that. Now, if you're thinking about taking on client work, having a monitor with you is going to make it so much easier for your clients to review the footage on location, especially if you're doing things like music videos, dance performances, where the artist usually wants to review the footage just to make sure they nail the performance or the choreography. So with a monitor, you don't have to have them hanging over your shoulder and reviewing the footage on that tiny little flip out display on your camera. Now let's talk about some of the specs. First of all, this monitor have a 5.5-inch Full HD touchscreen display. The contrast ratio is rated at 1000:1, and the screen brightness is stated as 500 nits. And I think we'll get back to those 500 nits later on in this video. The monitor can obviously handle Rec 709, HLG 2020, and a couple of other HDR formats and flavors. And speaking of color spaces, this monitor also comes with pre-installed conversion LUTs for some of the more common log formats like C-Log, S-Log 2 and 3, and V-Log. But you can also add your own LUTs to this monitor with help of a regular SD card. And this feature is kind of a lifesaver to those of you out there with a camera that can shoot log but don't have a built-in assist feature on your camera. And the same for those of you using a flat picture style like CineStyle or ProLost. And by the way, I like to leave the SD card in the monitor. That way I always have a spare SD card with me, and it also helps to keep some of the dust out. Now let's talk about build quality. I've not had any issues with anything breaking, any weird glitches or bad connections or anything during the 2 years that I've been using this monitor. That said, the control knobs are a bit plasticky, but the rest of the monitor, the housing, is made out of some sort of sturdy and robust plastic material, which also kind of helps to keep the weight down to a mere 235 grams without a battery. But if you add one of these, a Sony NPF style 750 battery, I think it is. Yeah, you're looking at a weight somewhere around 450 grams or about a pound for you Americans out there. And one of these will last you for about 6 to 7 hours, depending on how much you run the monitor and camera. But you can also run the monitor on Canon LPE6 batteries if you have a bunch of those laying around. There's even a USB-C power option as well as a 12-volt DC inlet. So lots of options for you on how to power this device. Since I've been using this monitor quite a lot, I figured I'd throw in a couple of complaints here in this video as well, before we head over to my kind of final thoughts and whether this monitor is actually a good purchase for you if you're in the market for a monitor today. So the first complaint I have is the screen brightness. 500 nits, I would say, is definitely on the lower end of what you want. It's definitely bright enough for indoor use, but if you're mostly shooting outdoors, running and gunning, maybe you should take a look at something with a bit more brightness. So that's my first complaint. The second complaint of mine is the headphone jack, or the placement of the headphone jack. When I use these types of lower and more compact monitor mounts, this one is from Small Rig and I freaking love these, the monitor mount kind of gets in the way of the headphone jack. There is a workaround. You can mount the monitor upside down, but then on the other hand, you kind of expose all the ports and the SD card slot to dust and moisture. So it's not my favorite workaround, but it kind of, yeah, it works, but it's not perfect. My third complaint is not so much of a complaint, more of a word of caution maybe, but the monitor keeps draining your battery if you leave it attached. So if you're looking at a longer downtime, or if you're just done for the day, make sure to detach the battery from the monitor, because it will continue to drain that battery even if it's powered off. Now, that was the complaint department. So would I recommend you to get this monitor if you're looking for a monitor today? I would say if you're looking at something in this price range, definitely yes, especially if you're mainly going to shoot indoors, even if the included hood does a pretty good job outdoors. But if you're more of a kind of outdoorsy run and gun type of filmmaker, then I would suggest that you take a look at something with at least 1000 nits. And I really love having a touchscreen. It works so well with the menu system on this monitor. And the menu system is very intuitive and easy to understand, so you won't have any problems getting everything set up and dialed in to your liking. Now, I also wanted to touch on size just briefly. I would say that 5 to 5.5 inches is definitely the smallest sized monitor that I would recommend. Even if you're someone that's traveling a lot and you're looking to have the most compact rig that you can put together, 5.5 inches is not huge. If you're doing a lot of manual focusing, or if you're doing longer interview gigs, maybe a 7-inch monitor would be a better choice. But the 5.5 inch comes with portability as well, so that's another aspect to consider. That pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank you for watching, and if you have any questions about this monitor or general questions about video or editing, leave them down below. Otherwise, I'll talk to you next week. Okay, bye.